Thank you so much for being here, everyone. We'll be getting started in just 1 minute. Hello, good evening to each and every one of you, or good afternoon for those who are in Hawaii. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Ask Me, our educational webinar series. My name is Audra Hines, Vice President of Care Services for the Golden West chapter of the ALS Association. I want to express our very sincere thanks to all of our supporters, including our sponsor tonight, BrainStorm Cell Therapeutics, as well as our mission benefactor families like the Ron Malone Fund and the Morris Family Caregiver Initiative. We are able to host an impressive number of these webinars, as well as build upon our programming for the future because of the generosity of donors like these. Tonight, we're here to talk about the important topic of advocacy. Advocacy has many meanings. One key type that many of us have heard of is self-advocacy, meaning the action of representing oneself or one's views or interests. In the medical world, that might encompass being proactive with your doctor and care team, making a list of important questions for your next visit, following up on critical appointments, and pushing for coverage with health plans and insurance companies. The complex nature of ALS often requires this level of advocacy. Some are able to advocate for themselves, others have family members to help, and some people need extra support for this. We are all too familiar with these issues, and we want to hear your story. Whether you're a person with ALS, a family member, caregiver, or a friend of someone living with the disease, we want to ensure that you or your loved one are connected with an expert care team and the best community of professionals to advocate for you. For more information about ALS, to find resources to help, or to share more about your personal ALS journey, please contact us through the various methods that you see on the screen. Tonight, we invited some special guests to help us understand more about these and other ways to advocate. You will hear from a terrific panel of legislative and advocacy experts tonight, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. First, I'd like to introduce Mary Kay Turner, who is the Senior Vice President of Patient Advocacy and Government Affairs with BrainStorm Cell Therapeutics. She's a member of the Board of Directors for the ALS Hope Foundation, and Mary Kay has led several teams of government affairs professionals who focused on significant legislative and regulatory issues that promoted and protected the discovery and development of innovative therapies. Thank you for being here, Mary Kay. I'm going to let you start your presentation and also introduce your wonderful panel members when you're ready to do so.
Thank you so much for having us tonight, Audra. We are thrilled to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, so we're absolutely thrilled to be here tonight. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, wrong screen, sorry. It's not moving. One second, sorry for the technical difficulty. Try this. Okay. There we go. I love it when a plan comes together. All right, thank you. All right, promise that's the last glitch we have. So thank you so much tonight for being here. I want to introduce some key legislative staff and a consultant that are here tonight. First of all, I'll welcome and thank Aisling McDonough for being here. She's the Chief of Staff for Congressman Eshoo. Ms. Eshoo is the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce and a vocal supporter for regulatory flexibility at the FDA. Ms. Eshoo represents the 16th District of California in the Bay Area. She and Aisling played a key role in the passage of Act for ALS. Aisling has a deep experience in healthcare, starting her career at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where she held a number of positions prior to coming to Congress. Aisling's first position on the Hill was a legislative assistant for Senator Schatz. She has a degree in political science and government and a master's degree in public policy, both from the University of Maryland. And Aisling is a wonderful champion for ALS. Next, I'll introduce Danny Hartle. Danny is a legislative assistant for Congressman Ken Calvert. Congressman Ken Calvert is co-chair of the ALS caucus, the chair of the Defense Subcommittee of the House Appropriations. He represents the 41st District in Southern California. Mr. Calvert has served as the co-chair from inception, and it was an original co-sponsor of Act for ALS. Danny has worked with Mr. Calvert for almost 3 years and has worked on various issues, including ALS, and has taken a lead role in the ALS caucus. He has a BS in food science and nutrition from Colorado State University. And last, but certainly not least, my colleague, Dr. Reyn Archer. Reyn has a long career in medicine, public health, and public policy. Most recently, he was the Chief of Staff for a senior member of Congress who was the co-sponsor of Act for ALS. Reyn has worked closely with the ALS community to develop ideas on Act for ALS, and he became interested and wanting to help in ALS when Congressman Fortenberry's brother-in-law was diagnosed at a very young age with ALS. So Reyn currently is acting as a consultant with us at BrainStorm Cell Therapeutics to work with Congress advocates and regulators. So thank you so much, Aisling, Danny, and Reyn for joining me. So tonight, the agenda, we're going to walk through what's advocacy, why is it important, what are the top types of advocacy, why is advocacy important for ALS, how do you build your strategy, how do you plan, and what are the important efforts? And after we walk through the slides, the panel will have a discussion, taking questions from you as well. So thank you. So what is advocacy? Advocacy is the opportunity to educate. And there's nothing more important than to educate about ALS. It begins with a concept or an idea, and it could be something as much as getting someone to put in a ramp at a restaurant so that you can access it. But it could be all the way through the legislative process where funds are appropriated, through the rulemaking process to make sure that the law is being implemented in the way that it should be. So it's advocacy, we do it every single day. Why is it important? Well, your voice matters and your actions are vital for delivering the messages to our entire community. And you really do have the ability and the power to bring attention to ALS. We've seen sweeping changes in recognition and major developments in Congress over the last few years. And that's due to all of you and all of the efforts of all of the wonderful advocacy organizations. So how do you build your strategy? So first of all, you have to identify what's your issue. What's the concern? Is it a change in policy? Is it increasing awareness? Is it a fundraising issue? Is it local, state, or federal? Is it a legislative issue or administrative? And who can address the issue and the correct venue? So you have to figure out what you want and where you need to get it before you can achieve it. So how do you plan your efforts? So do your research. Know about who you're meeting with, know about their staff, know what's important to them. Many people tell me, well, I can't go to DC. Well, that's okay, because your members have in-district meetings. You could meet them there. You can email. We now have Zoom. One good thing that came out of the pandemic, maybe. Phone calls, social media. It's important to tell your story. It's important to keep it concise, keep it brief, and then think about what's my end goal? What do I want to accomplish? And what do you think that your elected official can do to help you? And make sure that what you're asking is something that they can actually do. And always be polite, always thank them, and always follow up, because our members of Congress and their staff work very hard for us. And a little bit of thanks goes a long way, because they really do have a really hard job. So advocacy is important because you amplify the message, you start the conversation. More awareness means more advocacy, and together we certainly can make a difference. So when I think about advocacy, I'm going to bucket it in 4 buckets going forward. So there's disease awareness advocacy, there's policy advocacy, legislative advocacy, and access advocacy. So let's talk about the first one. So disease awareness can be a walk. It could be a golf tournament. It could be a number of awareness activities. I think many of us participated in Lou Gehrig Day on June 2nd, and that's really a great way to get out of our so-called choir, to let other people who might not be directly affected by ALS learn more about ALS, and then we build more people to be part of our fight. Go to a gala. Whenever I go to a gala, I was just at the ALS Association of Arizona Bite Night Gala, and I try and invite people to my table who don't have any connection or know anything about ALS. And my goal is when they leave, they'll feel connected and they'll do something about it. Because I really believe if people knew more, they would do more. This is just a list of the Golden West chapter walks coming up. I always try and do my local walk. I love it. It's a great way to be out with the community. Another example of disease awareness is clinical research. So clinical research is really the only way that laboratory science can be translated into treatments and cures for people living with ALS. And there's nothing greater than being a participant in a trial. It could be an interventional trial, it could be a biomarker trial, but without all of you participating in the trials, we can't move the science forward. So it's a really amazing thing to do, is to participate in clinical research. And Niels has lots of information on that, the Northeast ALS Alliance. So policy advocacy. So policy advocacy, I think of as advocacy where you're changing something, but you don't have to do it through changing the law or making a new law. So I'm going to spend a minute and talk about something that I believe is really foundational and has been foundational for the path forward for therapy development and regulatory flexibility. And that is the 2019 ALS guidance document for drug development for industry. Generally, the standard is 2 well-controlled trials for an approval. But in diseases, and ALS needs to meet that standard too, but the FDA has long stressed the appropriateness of exercising regulatory flexibility and applying statutory standards to drugs for serious diseases with unmet needs. And so that's what the ALS guidance document reinforces. And so how is this policy advocacy? Well, so many people worked for a very long time to get the ALS guidance document, a new one. It was very old. And members of Congress, including Mr. Calvert, signed a letter to Acting Commissioner Sharpless asking them to please deliver the ALS guidance document. So that's an ask for a member of Congress that wasn't legislative, but it was something that was in the purview of congressional members to do, and they wanted to help. So you see it's bipartisan. We have members of both houses and both parties that signed this letter. And so that was really important. And this is a great example of advocacy. And I think it really laid the foundation for the 2 therapies that we've recently had approved. Again, the NIH ALS strategic plan is a great example, a way to get involved. A number of members of the community are participating in this, and having a sound NIH plan will move the science forward and bring us to more treatments and cures, which is the goal that we all have to make ALS a chronic treatable disease. So legislative advocacy. So I'll just start with some basics. Find your members of Congress, develop a relationship with the staff and the member. These links will be available. You have 2 US senators and you have 1 House member, and you can find out who those people are by putting your zip code in for the House member. And it's also important to figure out what committee they're on, because certain committees are more important for health. And so I've listed here the House Appropriations, the Senate Appropriations, ENC, Health, Finance, Ways and Means, House Budget, Senate Budget. All of these are really important for the funding that we need for ALS to move it forward. So let's talk about a few important issues in advocacy. One thing I'll say is everybody should stop and cheer for a moment, because the ALS advocacy and political ecosystem has changed over the last few years. It's growing, it's active, it's influential. Members of Congress are fully engaged, and that's due to all of the work in the entire community. It takes a village to change a disease state. I believe that when you get more funding and when you get more beneficial health policy, it moves the science forward, and we all want treatments and cures. So just a few of the things that we've accomplished over the last 5 years. We know about the ALS Disability Act that waived the 5-month SSDI waiting period, which was really amazing for people living with the disease. 5 months can bankrupt people. And so that's really amazing that we got that changed. We have taken the CDMRP DoD spending from 10 million in 2019 to 40 million. And I believe that 40 million was just approved and appropriated, if I'm recalling right. 2 years ago, we had an amazing hearing, the path forward on advancing treatments and cures for neurodegenerative diseases. I think that was also really a transformational hearing. We passed the Act for ALS, which I believe it'll be a transformational law. It's $100 million a year. So that's 500 million over 5 years, and it'll be reevaluated. And then we have the congressional caucus in the House and in the Senate, and it's growing. Last count, I think there are 137 in the House, 22. So this is really amazing what we've been able to accomplish as a community. I'm going to stop for a minute. I mean, I don't know how many of you know Jamie Berry. Jamie Berry was a really strong advocate. She was a constituent of Congresswoman Eshoo's. And this talks about the power of one. The letters and the things that Jamie would write and do, you couldn't help but be touched by her and moved by her and want to do something. And I'm going to share just a little bit from the hearing, the path forward, advancing treatments and cures. So 1 second. Hopefully I'll get this. It'll be easier this time than last time. Okay. Hopefully everyone can hear this. All right, I'm just going to play a part of the hearing.
We're called for today's hearing to discuss the challenge of advancing treatments and cures for neurodegenerative diseases. My constituent, Jamie Berry, was diagnosed with ALS 1 year ago. She wrote a letter to me saying that, quote, "With ALS, a piece of you dies every single day. We are simply asking for a fighting chance to live the lives we were meant to live." Today, we're going to hear from 4 patients and caregivers who, like Jamie, are simply asking for a fighting chance against the neurodegenerative diseases that have afflicted their families. Brian and Sandra, Kala and Yvonne, thank you, especially for traveling across the country to offer your testimony to us. It was a difficult journey that you've made, and we thank you for being profiles in courage and being here to offer that testimony. Our work today is to help create the fighting chance against these deadly diseases. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders, each year 50 million Americans are affected by neurological disorders such as ALS, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, and Parkinson's. These diseases exact an enormous personal toll and a cost to the U.S. economy as much as $800 billion annually. Despite the prevalence, the deaths, and the heart-rending impact on families across our country, there are few effective treatments for neurological disorders. Lack of investment, difficult drug approval processes, and limited understanding of these extremely heterogeneous diseases all keep effective drugs off the market. Private companies invest 1/4 as much into neurological drugs as they do for oncology treatments. Only 7.9% of drugs for neurological disorders successfully make it from phase 1 to approval. And when they're successful, neurologic drugs take, on average, 50% longer to reach approval than drugs for other disease areas. There have been recent breakthroughs in understanding the genetic basis of the diseases and potential biomarkers, but this is yet to translate into effective treatments. For patients, a diagnosis is still a death sentence. I think every member of our committee has heard from ALS patients fed up with their lack of options.
So that it's online if you want to watch the hearing. It's pretty amazing. But let's go back. I mean, that's such a champion. So sadly, Jamie lost her battle with ALS in November of last year. But it just is the testament of the power of one and how even one person can make a difference. Sorry, it's not. All right, so now we'll talk just for a minute about the Congressional ALS Caucus. These are your chairs, Representative Ken Calvert. We have Danny on the line today. Brian Fitzpatrick, Representative Terry Sewell, Representative Chris Crow, and then we have Senator Coons and Senator Murkowski. And so these people have been really amazing advocates for us and are leading the way in terms of helping us move ALS forward. And you can always check and see if your member of Congress is one of the members of the caucus. All right, the Act for ALS, I'll touch on it just for a few minutes. It was signed into law December 23rd, 2021 by President Biden. What it establishes is an expanded access grant program, a public-private partnership for rare neurodegenerative diseases, and a rare disease grant program. And it's up to $100 million a year may be appropriated, and throughout 5 years, $500 million, and then it will be reevaluated. So I pulled this quote from the former head of the neurological division, Billy Dunn. He talks about the underlying authority is clear in allowing, but also endorsing and encouraging the application of regulatory flexibility in serious diseases. And it's unquestionably relevant to ALS. And we have 2 new therapies approved, which is so exciting. And we have the first accelerated approval in ALS. I spent 20 years of my career working on oncology, and that was a real game changer for oncology when we started getting accelerated approval. So I pray and hope that we are on the precipice of many treatments for ALS. I'll spend a couple minutes now talking about access advocacy because we do have approved therapies and some people have problems getting access to those therapies. So I hear about insurance barriers to approved therapies for ALS. There's certain tools called utilization management where you have to fail something first, or you need a prior authorization, or your physician has to do it peer-to-peer. This takes time away from the staff, away from physicians, and frankly, people living with ALS don't have time to wait. So there are some ways to push back on these policies: social media platforms, letters, emails, op-eds, media stories. I'll just tell a quick story about a friend of mine who was battling breast cancer. She's a widow. Her husband died of ALS. She needed a medication to keep her white blood cell count up, and her insurance denied it 3 times. And they said, "We're never going to give it to you." They did her white blood cell count. It was dangerously low. She was at work. They said, "You go home now." don't leave your house for, I think it was 4 days. We're very worried about you. So we took to social media. We went after her plan, said, this is unacceptable. This is a widower, etc. Within 4 hours, they had called her physician back and approved her Neulasta. So you don't like to do things like that, and we want to work collaboratively with everybody, but sometimes extreme measures need to be taken. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's my favorite quote. So I'll thank you for your time, and we'll start with one question that I had gotten before, and I'm going to ask if Aisling and Reyn and Danny will turn their cameras on, and I'll stop sharing in a minute. I'll read the question, and I'll ask Aisling to maybe address it first, and then Danny, and then Reyn. Can you share your thoughts on the most effective ways advocates can engage with Congress?
Hi, so I'm Aisling McDonough. I work for Congresswoman Eshoo, but I'm here just on my own. I don't, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Congresswoman, just kind of classic legislative warning there. And thanks for having me. I would say that the best way to advocate with your member of Congress, one, know that you're your constituent. You know where you're from. When you call the office, provide your zip code and explain why you're calling in very clear terms. When you write to the office, explain really clearly what your issue is and why you need it, and the personal story and how you think the member of Congress can help. Just being really explicit and clear and personal, and making sure that it's your member that you're talking to is the best way to do it. Sometimes we get messages from folks who aren't constituents, and while we appreciate hearing their stories, it's always, they're literally the representative of the district, so they represent those people who are part of the district, and so that's one of the key points that I would remind folks of.
Thank you, Danny.
Hi everyone. Nice to meet you. I will start by echoing Aisling's comments about her earlier disclaimers. And I agree 100% with everything she said. I did want to add one thing is also, as you begin to develop a relationship with the office, get to know the staffer who handles, the healthcare portfolio, and that also helps out.
Thank you. And Reyn, can you turn on your camera?
It won't let me.
Oh, okay. Well, at least you're unmuted. That's good.
Okay, now I can do it. I think.
Right.
Start my video.
Okay, we can see you.
All right, great. Well, one of the things that I think is important is, as Aisling already said, is that you need to be very precise. I also think that one of the things that, having done hundreds of meetings with health on behalf of individuals coming related to health issues, is that sometimes these organizations will give you big folders of information, and they might have 5 or 6 bills, and you're supposed to do that all day long. And so it's really helpful if you really focus on the exact thing that's most important to you, because it's often difficult to do multiple things in a congressional office, because you have to go to the member, you have to learn every single issue, you have to explain it to the congressman, and then you have to be able to advocate as a staffer to the congressman too. So the clearer you are and the narrower you are in your request, it makes it much easier to do that. The other thing that I found is a lot of advocates would be willing to sort of say, follow up with me, say, please follow up with me in a couple of weeks so I can give you an update on what we're doing, just to make sure that I keep on top of things. So it is a relationship, as Danny says. Develop the relationship and foster the relationship, and try to understand that all of us on Capitol Hill are people too, and we have a lot of things we have to cover.
Thank you, Reyn. Audra, did you want to start asking questions? I mean, I have some others that I can ask, but if we want to move to the questions people have asked.
Yeah, you know what? If you have a couple of others, Mary Kay, that you want to ask the panel, that's great. And then, yeah, I'll chime in with some audience questions after that. That's perfect.
Okay, so I'll ask, so since the hearing 2 years ago on neurodegenerative diseases and the path forward, I guess it's 2 years ago, July, it seems almost impossible. What do you think was the outcome and the benefits of that hearing?
Well, Act for ALS passed. The hearing was about the neurodegenerative diseases. It was about ALS, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, and the difficulty it is for those diseases to get kind of the research and treatment that's needed, and the difficulty is that neurological diseases themselves present. And I think I made a clear case for why Act for ALS was an important policy to pursue. And I think that, hearing from the witnesses and their personal stories was really clear. Hearing from the FDA and from the other government witnesses, NIH, about what they're working on was very, very helpful. So I think that that was the main driver for passage of the bill, to educate the members and for people to be able to hear those stories.
One of the things I would add is, having watched that hearing and been so proud of Ms. Eshoo, and by the way, you were on that video if you didn't pay attention, Aisling, from the tweet, but there was truly bipartisan support to challenge FDA to follow the regulatory flexibility that came out in that guidance. And I believe FDA had to really hear that and take that back home and start thinking about, well, what are we going to do about it? I think that was a really powerful moment. And I think when Brian and Wallach and Sandra Brevia got up there and said, this is the argument for our life, I mean, you could hear a pin drop, because it really made it incredibly poignant that this hearing had the chance to make a big difference in the future state of how FDA managed the approval of drugs.
Yeah, thank you, Reyn. Danny, did you want to add anything? Or Aisling, go ahead.
I just want to be clear, though, when you're talking to your member or to anyone, the member can't advocate on behalf of a particular drug or an FDA decision. What it can do, what members can do is can ask questions. They can try and understand the process more, try and understand what authorities the FDA has or other agencies have. Act for ALS has a lot of benefits to the NIH too, better understanding what the NIH needs. So I just want to be clear that it's not, members hauling up different witnesses and yelling at them to fall in line and do something. This is educational, and then to learn kind of where the roadblocks are and how to overcome them legislatively.
No, absolutely. And FDA has a very important role, and Congress's role is to make sure they're funded appropriately and can move forward. But the science decision always has to sit with the FDA. Thank you, Aisling. Danny, do you want to add anything?
I think Aisling and Reyn covered.
So Danny, I'll start with you on this one. So first of all, what are the primary goals for the Congressional ALS Caucus, and how can the advocacy community help support these goals? And maybe you could share how Mr. Calvert came to co-chair it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the last question first. Like many of the panel members here and many of the individuals attending, ALS has impacted our office as well. A number of years ago, one of our staffers' mother was diagnosed with ALS and has since passed away. So that's where the congressman, really started getting involved in the ALS community. As far as the ALS caucus, obviously a lot of caucuses on Capitol Hill. Primary goal is to bring stakeholders like yourselves together in one space, members and stakeholders together. And it's really just an area to collaborate and bring ideas together and act on those ideas as a unified body.
Right, thank you. Reyn or Aisling, anything to add to that?
No, I would just thank all the co-chairs, because they take a lot of requests, and they're incredibly generous with their time. And they do want to know, though, as a collective, to Danny's point, what are the things that could happen? And if you could bring a collective of ideas and start the dialogue, there are certainly ways to continue to make more progress. But it is definitely in a dynamic of relationship, and being sensitive to the fact that these offices are basically covering every aspect of every issue of every single constituent in their district. So,
yeah, thank you. So when I look back over the last 5 or 6 years, we've accomplished a lot in ALS. When people told me about Act for ALS was going to pass 2 years ago, I'm like, no way is it getting through the Senate? And, so it's exciting. And it was really a great example of bipartisanship and people working together. And I think what we all want. So I guess I would put this to Aisling and Danny. So we've accomplished so much. What's next? What can we do?
I'll say one thing that the Congresswoman has worked on is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H. This is an agency. So NIH does basic research, it plants 1,000 seeds, and it does kind of long-range 10-year studies of what happens. This agency is invented to kind of pick up the basic research that NIH has discovered, figure out what's the most beneficial, but would be difficult for the private industry to invest in because it's risky. So neurological diseases are a good example of that. You saw in the Congresswoman's speech that they have less investment from private industry because it's basically that it's difficult and there's not enough known about it. So ARPA-H's role is to do that advanced research, dig into those really hard problems, and make it less difficult for the private industry to pick up and create new products and bring them to market. So they're doing all sorts of interesting work. They have $3 billion right now. They just announced one neat project that will be regenerative bone growth. So if you have osteoporosis or arthritis, it's an injection that would fix your bones or your joints. And I think that they're going to be rolling out many new, more exciting kind of these future-looking projects that really take on some of these most deadly diseases like ALS, like glioblastoma, pancreatic cancer, other things that have these really awful 5-year from diagnosis life sentences, and really try and bring real change in an area where a lot of the private industry isn't working in because it's just too difficult, and they can do kind of other simpler things. And so I would encourage folks to work closely on that, pay attention to that. It's a new agency, so we don't want it to starve on the vine and not be able to get the funding it needs to continue to make really interesting progress. Continue to also Act for ALS has appropriations that it needs each year. The appropriations is going to be a difficult fight. You probably maybe saw what was going on about the debt ceiling, and there was potentially going to be cuts for people. People really need to explain to their members what it would mean for them not to fully fund Act for ALS, what it would mean not to fully fund the NIH or ARPA-H for FDA. When you are talking about delays, FDA needs more money to be able to have the staff it needs to actually do the science and review the drugs. So especially as we kind of enter into appropriation cycle, which I think will be pretty difficult, explaining to your members how this federal funding helps you and what you need is going to be really important.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's important that all of these agencies are funded to be able to move the science forward. And the people at FDA are working very hard, and they have the new center too, so they're short-staffed there and trying to hire for all the people on the super center. So that's important. Danny, what would you like to?
Yeah, I also, ALS communities made, tremendous strides over the last few years with Act for ALS, increasing CDMRP funding. And I was, say similar to Aisling is that, we have a good chunk of funding now, and, ensuring that funding continues. Appropriations happens on a yearly basis, and that funding isn't guaranteed. So ensuring that that funding is continuing, and then also working with the agencies to ensure that that funding is being used properly. And then the agencies are implementing programs, properly, and that we're seeing results.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have to
Let me
work.
just say
together.
let me say one quick thing. I mean, what we've got here, which is nice, is Danny is with Mr. Calvert, who's on the Appropriations Committee. That's where the money comes from. And Ashling is with Ms. Eshoo, and that's where the ideas come from. So, one is called authorizing, one is called appropriating. And so they complement each other. And Mr. Calvert is a senior leader and Ms. Ashling is a senior leader. So they have a lot of sway. So you better be nice to them.
Thank you. All right, Audra, I could keep going, but let's go to the audience questions.
Yeah, no, this has been great. And actually, a couple of these questions tie a little bit into a couple of things you all already answered, but there are a couple of things I'm going to weave in together, and then anyone on the panel can take this. Someone's asking, what impact does advocacy have on FDA approvals? And does the FDA consider advocacy efforts, in the midst of drug approval? From the same person tacking onto that, what's the possibility of advocates suing the FDA in the event a decision goes against the wishes of the advocates?
Well, I think it's difficult. FDA has its scientific process. It lays out how drugs are approved really clearly. And so it has its certain times when patient voices can be heard. I feel like in recent years, they've really worked harder to better understand and hear patient voices. I don't know of a case where a patient's brought something against the FDA. I mean, there's a long history though of patient advocates being really clear, starting with HIV, being really clear with the FDA and the NIH about when more needs to be done and when a disease is being ignored. And I think speaking with each other, working with each other to better understand that, self-education, but I think also making sure that you're aware of what the world is and what the rules are, so that you're knowledgeable, and when you're doing something, it's kind of targeted to what can make the best impact is really important too. And it can be difficult. It's very complicated regulatory science. I think keeping all those pieces in mind, but looking at past kind of patient advocacy campaigns like ACT UP is an interesting and important place to take inspiration from.
That's great.
I did want to add on that. There is, for all who aren't aware, there is a FDA patient engagement portal, and it kind of lays out steps on best ways to engage with the FDA for advocacy. So I encourage everyone to check that out.
One other way to advocate is to write letters as it pertains to any of the drugs that are coming before the FDA. You have an opportunity to write letters. You have an opportunity to sign up to speak. But your voice can be heard through the formal process that Ashling was speaking about at the FDA.
Yeah. So yes, through any drug that's being reviewed, we saw it in the recent AdComs. There's an open public hearing session where, where you see people signing up to speak. There's the docket where people can write letters. And honestly, that's the best way to have this scientific debate. It's not really on social media. It's really through the rigorous scientific process at an AdCom. And then if a drug isn't being reviewed, what Ashling and Reyn and Danny said, there are many ways that the FDA engages with patients. They'll meet with people living with the disease. I think they've been very open to meeting with people. And again, they have standards that they follow, and I think most people all people at the FDA are dedicated public servants. That's why they're there. And we need to find ways to work with them together.
Thanks to all four of you. That was terrific. Just following up a little bit of a separate question, but related. Someone's asking if you have recommendations for what's better to be advocated for at a local or a state level, as opposed to advocating for something at the federal level, if you're able to answer.
So I can start at a state level. There's a number of states, including California, who have money appropriated to ALS. So if you want state money that goes to your clinics, that's a state issue, right? So that's just one example. And I think Pennsylvania is a state that also has money appropriated at the state level. Some state budgets, I used to run state government affairs at BMS, so I know a lot about the states, but some states don't have any discretionary money. And so, that wouldn't be, you have 50 states and they're all different. And so you have to find out what the budgets are like in those states and, if there's any discretionary funds. So that's one issue.
One other issue for the states is the states are the place where people live and are cared for and have clinicians and doctors and caregivers and respite and all sorts of other services that go, durable medical equipment, all of that's provided at the state level. And if you're finding that you're not getting those services adequately in your state, you certainly can go to your legislature and raise the point and even look at making sure that the state is actually providing access to certain things that are just basic services. The federal government is determining much more of the policies about what drugs are approved and what budgets are funded or how Social Security benefits are provided. So they each play a role.
Yeah, I would say so agencies like the FDA, NIH, Medicare, Social Security, those are all at the federal level. Medicaid's a shared responsibility between the state and the federal. So if you're having problems with your Medicaid, I would probably start with your state, at your state level, or even at your county level in California first. If you're having any problems with your local clinic or your local hospital, I would go to your local officials first to raise the issue. That's where the state isn't responsible for regulating or making sure that those are operating appropriately. If you're having problems with your insurance, it's usually a tricky one. Oftentimes it's at the state level. It's your Department of Insurance. There's usually a hotline that can help you. But you might just want to reach out to your federal official too, who could probably help you in some ways as well, or at least get you to the right place. We get casework all the time where it should probably go at the state level, and we just help people find their way through that. So I would always encourage people, don't hesitate to reach out to your representative. You'll be surprised how much they can do and how effective their casework can be. We handle cases about Medicare and Social Security every single day. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. That's what your representative's there for. And if they're not doing it, then you can change that too.
Change it with your vote. Thank you. That's really helpful. Someone's asking, just a statement, wondering, are members of Congress aware that ALS is in every community? This person says they reach out to many members of Congress, even if they are not their representative. They're sending a mass email to Congress. Is it possible that this would have an effect, is the question.
Yeah, and I think they said that they send me an email, and look, I appreciate that. I read the emails that I get, and I try to respond to as many as possible, even if you're not a constituent, because there's always something to learn. I think though that members, especially on specific issues, they have a responsibility to their constituents, and so that's who they're supposed to be representing. That's why they have their budgets and their caseworkers and everything like that I just mentioned in the last question. So it's always helpful to focus on your member. I'll say though that one thing that Jamie was really great at as our constituent was that she always had a friend. She's, I'm going to find someone who lives in this district and have them reach out. So there's that too. You have a community. So I'm thinking about that and helping other people see how they can relate. But mass emails I think can be an effective tool sometimes. sometimes it can just flood email boxes and it can really, make people who are receiving them cynical. So it's a balance, right? Sometimes you need to be aggressive, and I completely understand that, but sometimes it can sour a relationship. So I think it's just a balance of figuring out how best to approach it, and seeing what kind of outcomes you're getting from it.
Totally makes sense. The last couple questions here, they might be from the same person, and in some ways they might be related. Just asking about, wondering if you think Congress seems open to future legislation to move the agenda forward for discovery of new treatments and, for ALS. And in some ways maybe tied to the clip of the hearing that we just saw with Ms. Eshoo, knowing that was hosted almost 2 years ago. What do you think were the most important benefits of that hearing? And maybe that leads into this question about being open to legislation around new treatments.
Yeah, I think supporting medical research, supporting agencies like the NIH and the ARPA-H is important. If you have a legislative idea, I think kind of building that coalition and working forward on that, finding your sponsor, finding people who are going to be your advocate in the Congress, that's how you get it done. I think there's always an appetite for progress and innovation, and finding ways to have safe and effective and affordable drugs for people, and that's always a focus of my member and the work that we do. So I don't think there's, no one's ever. Our office certainly isn't complacent. We are going to keep driving forward. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what's your opportunity and how to make it happen.
Makes a lot of sense. Anyone else? We actually don't have any other questions in the Q&A, but I just want to invite the panelists if you have any final thoughts or final words before I do a little wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. It's an incredible community to work with. And at the end of the day, it's, groups like yourselves and advocates like yourselves that bring their personal stories and personal journeys to the attention of myself and, their congressional members. And this is, these grassroots efforts really are how things, start and get done in Congress. And so I want to appreciate everyone for attending today.
Thanks, Danny.
I would
Yeah,
just say
so-
a personal story can be incredibly powerful as my congressman's brother-in-law, Joe Gregory, had ALS, and he'd been in a clinical trial, and the congressman asked me to find a way to get him access to that treatment, which was not possible. So we decided that we had to create Act for ALS out of that, so that process would not happen again. And we started with the first bill that made a lot of noise called No More Placebos, because a lot of the patients with ALS hate the idea that they're only in a placebo trial. So one person with one idea, like the power of one, and Jamie Berry was very active in Act for ALS, and she talked to me, and I said, you need to get to know Congresswoman Eshoo. She's a really good person and she's really powerful. And she established that rapport directly. I mean, it was stunning, the level of relationship they had and how those personal stories and those personal relationships are what actually changed and got Act for ALS, the idea going, and got it passed. So there is more space for that, but it will probably come out of someone's unique challenge within the framework of ALS itself.
Just related to that, Dr. Archer, the last question that came in is someone's asking, what tactic do you suggest if we have a representative who is maybe not responding or just not meaningfully interacting with us? The question.
Well, one of the groups that we worked with on Act for ALS was Mayuri Saxena, and she and her brother, who lives in California, she's in New York and her brother's in California as an actor, and they had a friend who had a mechanism so advocates across the country could email every single office And some of the offices were starting to get 700 to 1,000 emails, even after the member finally decided to sign on to the bill. And they would write us or call us and say, can you get them to stop? So it's incredible how if you really, it's not just one, but the one becomes 1,000. And if you can use a tool when you're trying to drive something with your member will start to pay attention if they keep getting lots and lots of emails.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Well,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I would just add that it's like everyone can do advocacy, and it really is the only thing that changes things. And our members of Congress are there to help. And no act of advocacy is too small.
I'm really honored to be with Danny and Aisling and to have them from their offices be with us. And again, it takes all of us working together, and they work really hard, and I'm grateful for them.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And one last question that just came in. What does Congress think about the progress on implementation of Act for ALS? Would Congress be willing to receive comments on the efficacy of the bill?
Yes, of course. Willing to receive comments and hear kind of people's experience with it and what they think could be improved.
Excellent. Well, I want to send a huge thanks to all four of you for being here tonight. This was a very unique and interesting topic for us and very relevant. And thank you to each of you for your time. And thanks so much to our audience. We are always happy to have each and every one of you here. I think we have some other slides if somebody can pop those up. We are excited to announce that registration is open for our 2023 events. And whether you're in California or Hawaii, we invite you and your friends and family members to join us for these meaningful, family-friendly, and festive gatherings to raise awareness and support for our ALS community. So please do join us. We also encourage you to visit and subscribe to our calendar, as there's always something going on at Golden West. To learn more about our monthly support groups, events, and programs, please visit calendar.alsogoldenwest.org for more information. And finally, as you know, philanthropy fuels everything we do, and we're grateful to committed donors who give generously throughout the year. To learn more about how you can support these programs, please visit our website at give.alsogoldenwest.org. And please do watch for the short survey on tonight's presentation you'll receive via email to help us plan for future programs like this one. Thank you so much.